My name is Christian Novak, a representative of the Military Education Preservation Project, and I'm at the home of Lee Key on this day, October 11th, 2020, talking to Mr. Key about his time in the service. Mr. Key, can you start by giving us some background information on yourself, starting with where you were born?
Yes, I was born in South Seminole County, here in Georgia. I was born. I was actually delivered by a midwife, which was pretty common back in the 30s, I guess. My mother was, as far as I know, there was no doctor involved. I was just delivered by a midwife. My father was at that time, was a sharecropper, as was most farmers, or many farmers at that time. In South Georgia, my family was such. I had 3 siblings. I had 2 older sisters and an older brother, and they were like 11 years difference between those 3 and me, so they were up in them out pretty much gone by the time I got up to be a pretty good size. My father, as I said, was a sharecropper. He eventually bought a 160-acre farm in Seminole County. That's sort of where I grew up, on a farm. It was a typical farm for that time of in that era. 2 mules, plows, and whatever else you needed, and that's sort of how I grew up and where I sort of come about. I attended school at. My first year of schooling was at an old CC camp out of what is now they're called a power dam. There was a school was still there, and the FDR school, which doesn't exist anymore either, was being built. And once it was completed, my second grade, I picked up at FDR, which was in the lower part of Seminole County. I went there up through the. I think it was around the 5th grade. They changed the bus routings, so I had to start going to the city school in Nelsonville, and I went there through the. I was actually in the middle about the 8th grade, and my father had bought a farm. I was farming. He had an accident. He was in the woods actually cutting fence posts. He split his foot wide open, and being the only one there, we tried to figure out what to do, and my dad, of course, couldn't afford to hire anybody, and the farm was, to keep the farm, somebody had to work. So I actually dropped out of school with his guidance from telling me, and we were blessed to have a good neighbor who guided me. We finished up that crop year and actually got through the planting of the next crop year with my dad unable to do much moving at all. He couldn't ride a tractor. He couldn't sit there. He couldn't use his foot at all. So there's very little he could do. But bottom line to that is, by the time I was able to go back to school, I had missed in essence 2 years of schooling. From that, my sister, bless her heart, she saw the need of me finishing school. She took me up to Columbus, Georgia, and I worked daytime with a company called Tom Houston Peanut Company, and went to school in the evenings, and was able to, I'm not sure it was called a GED at that time, but I was able to get all the high school training that was available at that time, and actually finished up earlier. And I, not knowing what I was going to do and what I was going to do, I certainly wanted to be a part of the military at some part of my life. I come home and talk to my mom and dad, and I was still just 17, and this was in November, and I asked, you had to sign for your children to go in service if they're not 18. So I asked, and my dad had no problem with it. My mama had a real issue with it, but after some begging and moaning and groaning and all of that, my mom conceded that I was going to go in January anyway, as soon as I turned 18. So she agreed. So I started my military career in November, or I think it was around November 30th. I went up to Fort Jackson, South Carolina, to take basic training. The 101st Airborne was a training unit at that time. Their mission was to train recruits. I remember very vividly. We run everywhere we went. the only time we ever got to walk was after we had won the regimental parade. As the best company, they let us walk back to the company area, and I found that hard to believe that they would actually let us walk back 1.5 miles. But anyway, I finished basic training at Fort Jackson. From there, I come down to Fort Gordon, Georgia, because I had the recruiter that was very helpful to me. I told him what I wanted in life, and he said, "Sounds like you want outdoors." He said, "How about telephone lineman?" I said, "Boy, that's what I want." So I was trained as a telephone lineman in the military. During my training as a lineman, I tore the ligaments, or didn't tear the ligaments, I'm sorry. I had shin splints, and I had to recycle in that class, and didn't get to graduate with my class there. So I graduated a month or so later with another class, and all my original class went to Europe. I wound up going to White Sands Missile Range in New Mexico as a telephone lineman. I arrived out there. 2 weeks after I got there, I was called in for an interview, and they said, "We want to change your job. We need somebody to support our radar efforts out here." And I'm sort of paraphrasing, but he says, "We need some people to train as optical trackers." And just to give you a background on that, radar at that time would track the missiles and rockets that was being fired and studied out there. But you had to get them off the ground because the radar would lock in on the ground equipment. So they had an optical tracker, and the radar was slave to the tracker, and the tracker would take it up, and when it got out of the cleared the launching pad and everything, then it could lock on automatically. And so bottom line, I was trained to be a part of a two-man tracking team to optically track the launching of the rockets and missiles that they were studying out there at the time. But the reason me and the other guy that was picked was training is not to work there. The Army had committed to being a part of a program back then. It was called the International Geophysical Year. If you go back and read about it, there's a history about it. And basically the program was that nations come together to study the Earth. And there was many facets in what they were studying, one being the atmosphere and everything, find it. They studied the oceans, they studied the landmass and all of that. But there was an effort to study up in Canada what was called the Aurora Borealis, or what we know as the Northern Lights. So there was a team put together from two universities. I don't remember where they were from, but there was also a Navy launching team who would launch. What was used was the Airby High rocket. I think it had a range of maybe a couple hundred miles. It was used, and I don't know what instrumentation they used to record the Northern Lights, but there was extensive launching and recording of the Northern Lights when they become available. So the Army's Signal Corps was responsible for the communications at that site and for the radar coverage, and the Navy was responsible for the launching of the rockets. So that's how I become part of the International Geophysical Year, and that's where I spent my first 3 years in the military. Basically, after finishing up the training and everything, was communicating, going on short trips up to Fort Churchill from White Sands Missile Range. And every time they would be certain periods that the Northern Lights were available, they'd have the team up there and they'd do the launches. So out of that grew a major I worked for, who was a military officer in charge of it. He said, I want to promote you. I don't want you to be a specialist. I want you to be a non-commissioned officer. He said, I'm got to change your MOS, which was my telephone lineman MOS. Even though I never worked it, he took me and made me electronic warfare specialist, where he promoted me as a Sergeant E5. And that is how I become involved in military intelligence. From that, I never worked in intelligence. Those first 3 years, I was that optical tracker. But after my 3 years, I decided I'd get out and maybe go to school. I come home, not sure what to do. I looked around. I took a job locally here in Bainbridge with a company called Bainbridge Truck and Tractor, doing anything they asked me to do, from working in the parts room to trying to do some collecting, even tried to sell a few vehicles. That was a laugh. But anyway, while doing that, I get this call from a artillery unit over in Dothan, Alabama, saying, "Hey, you've been assigned here. Why haven't you been attending training meeting?" I said, "No, I'm in a control group because there's not a military intelligence unit nearby." And a smart young guy said, "No, you've been assigned over here, and we're going to put you back on active duty if you don't start attending meetings." I said, "It's what?" He says, "You'll go in and we'll train you as an artilleryman. That's what you are now." I said, "Well, I don't think so, because I have no training." He said, "We'll take care of that." I said, "Well, I don't think so." So after my conversation with him, I got on the phone and called Department of the Army and shared my situation. And the guy said, "Well," the guy I talked to, he said, "Well, I don't think they can do that." He said, "But I'm not sure. I need to look into it." He said, "Well, what are your thoughts?" I said, "Well, look, if I'm going to go back on active duty, let me go back in as what I know, my military intelligence, MOS." And he said, "Yeah, I can handle that." He said, "How would you like to come on active duty for 2 years?" Not knowing what I wanted to do, I said, "Yeah, that's a good idea. Let's go back to." And so I went back in active duty, 2 years enlisted reserve. I was assigned to, from there, I was assigned to Fort Huachuca, Arizona. Fort Huachuca was a lot of research and development was going on there. At that time, the Army's the Army Security Agency existed, but they were not part of the research and development. They were recipients of what come out of the studies and the equipment that was provided, but they had certain enlisted, had to have so many enlisted men there to sort of operate the equipment, to do the things that the military people would normally do. So I become part of that and wound up spending almost 6 years out there. I was sort of locked in. I wasn't in the security agency per se, but yet I had the security agency MOS. So a lot of very interesting projects I had an opportunity to work on out there. We worked on a lot of navigation systems, countermeasures towards denying the use of navigation systems. That was some of the most interesting. We had projects of using balloons to carry antennas up for periods of time where you inflate the antenna balloon, carry the antenna to a certain height, and you'd communicate and get it down before the enemy could see it. So and we had a lot of new devices, new equipment that was brought on the market, new types of antennas that were studied and brought forth and to use on existing equipment. New delivery devices. One thing in particular we worked on was called an air delivery device. Become a disposable delivery device for delivering small electronic packages wherever you wanted to drop them. And it was nothing more than a device with a drag chute to keep it in an upright position with a styrofoam nose cone to absorb the shock when it hit the ground and turn itself on. It would upright itself from CO2 bottles in its legs, would stand it up, and it would turn itself on, and whatever the package was, and there were several options for the packages. It could be a jammer, it could be a receiver, it could be whatever technology at the time would allow you to construct and put into it. So we had I had a very interesting almost 6 years out there. It was great, except I couldn't get promoted because I was just, there was an E6 slot, and that's what I filled, and that's all I had. But during that 6 years, I had the opportunity, through the recommendations of the military people that I work with out there, to go to officer candidate school. The colonel I worked for felt like that I had possessed the whatever to become a commissioned officer, and he said, "I want to put in a recommendation," and we gathered letters or recommendations, and I attended officer candidate school at Fort Benning, and I can't think. See, that would have been in the 60s. I was there, and It was certainly different from what I had come to. I had gotten back into the Army, basically. Out there it was a job, and pretty much you wore the uniform. But here you did the 1, 2, 3, 4 marching and firing and all of the other things that go and we normally see in the Army. And in my 7th week, had an accident. We were out running early one morning, and I got sort of shoved into a chain that was stretched across the company street to block vehicles from coming on, and hung my leg in it and pulled the ligaments. So in essence, it wound up my tour at the officer school. I was assigned back to my unit. Sort of picked up where I left off with. I spent, like I said, the latter part of those 6 years. The Army Security Agency says, "Hey, we got this guy at Fort Huachuca. He's never been anywhere. It's time for him to get involved and go some of the other sites." So they picked me up after I had to go through a special clearance. It took about 6 months to get the clearance approved and everything. They picked me up, and I was in essence put in the Army Security Agency from Fort Huachuca. From there, I was assigned to the field station. They call them field stations. Army Security Agency called them field stations. Korea. I was assigned to there, and we were the company. I went from the field station out to an island called Kongwado, and of course we monitored North Korea. We monitored communications. We monitored any electronic devices that they may have operated. Nothing visual because we weren't that close, but we did monitor communications, troop movements, and all of that. And I happened to be in Korea during the time of the Pueblo incident. If you remember, it was a very trying time for America at that time in the military, and we did play a part in securing what was going on with the people who had been captured and provided it back to Hawaii, to the Pacific Command at that time. We were the station that was gathering a lot of the intelligence, sharing back to us. So very interesting and trying times for us. So it was very interesting, to say the least, to have been there. And there was even talk. I don't know how what was involved, but there, as you know, that was Navy, but they was talking to put some of the people in Korea and the Army on there, but never materialized. So again, fortunately, I guess that we didn't have any. The Army Security Agency didn't have any people on that ship, but could have. Finished my tour in Korea, left there and went to the Army Security Agency Training Center, which was up at Fort Devens, Mass. Spent as an instructor. I spent the better part of 3 years there as an instructor, teaching at that time I care what was the Army classified as a 98J, and that was electronic warfare specialist, or in everyday life it was electronic warfare intercept and control, up to and including operating, intercepting, and operating countermeasures equipment to deny the enemy the use of their communications and other devices. So anyway, we trained operators, the 98Js there, along with other MOSs that the Army Security Agency put forward, code takers, voice intercept operators, and other trades that could be a part of gathering intelligence, basically, for the combat. And let me just say something right here. If I had a war, I guess it was the Cold War. But my respect and real admiration goes to the good guys out there in the Army and all the other armed forces that carry the weapons, that's looking at both end of a rifle, one pointed at them and pointing one, and doing those things. So those are the real heroes to me, and those are the guys that I take my hat off and respect them. Now, I'm no doubt what I done was important into the big picture, but the real heroes of the Army and Air Force or Marines, Navy, whoever, was those guys who were on ground zero with doing the ground pounding and was there. Those are the heroes. So I don't want to put myself in those classes, but they are my heroes too. So, and I was blessed to know a lot of them. I worked with some of them. I was at Fort Devens teaching. The 10th Special Forces was assigned there, and I had some good friends who lived in my neighborhood with the Special Forces, and I take my hat off to those guys and the Delta team, all good people. And if I was to go to a battle today, I'd certainly want to accompany Marines on this side, and yeah, I can use that Air Force jet in the air too. So yeah, those are my real heroes. Let me pick up. I don't know where we're at here, but let me just pick up. I spent a year. I said that was my second tour there. I spent a better part of 3 years at Fort Devens teaching. At that time, I was given orders to go to Asmara, Ethiopia. We had a field station there. The Army Security Agency did. And of course, if you look at it, Ethiopia and the locality, we were actually in the province of Eritrea. And there's a history there too. If anyone that's a history buff goes back and know that Eritrea was put under Ethiopia for a given number of years during World War II, and it was supposed to regain its independence at some point after 30 years, whatever. I can't forget the time frame, but there was an internal battle going on over there. But it was an accompanied tour. I had my family there with me. And basically, we were monitoring the deep space program from there. That was the ideal location for it. And we did monitor what was going on in space from our adversaries and reported that. I spent better part of 2 years there, and as I shared earlier, this friction between Eritrea and the Ethiopian become more and more, and we in essence lost a carrier who would go down to the Red Sea. A lot of bulk stuff would come in on a bulk carrier, picking up bulk mail and stuff like that. One of our carriers life was taken, and an AK-47 was thrown down around the vehicle and live where he was. So one side blamed the other. Eritrea said Ethiopia done it. Ethiopia said no, it was the Eritrean rebels. So it got to a point that the field station was eventually closed down, but my family and when I relocated, come back to the Army Security Agency School as an instructor for my second tour there. I spent, I think, about 14 months there as I was blessed, and that I was in charge of the evening instruction classes, so I normally had the day off and had a lot of time to do some exploring in New England and get around and get about. And great country in New England. You definitely enjoyed the Four Seasons. It was a beautiful country, and I always said I wanted to go back and never have made it back. But I left Fort Devens after a better part of in the second, I guess I'd been at 14 or 15 months or so, not knowing the real time. I went to, I had an assignment to go to Shemya, which is up in the Aleutian Islands. Shemya's about 1,300 miles from the coast of Alaska. It's next to the last island in the chain of the Aleutian Islands. The Aleutian Islands is, as you know, is fairly close to Russian territory. And it's public knowledge that the Soviets had a missile launching study program going on, and it's public knowledge as to why we were there. We were monitoring what was going on, and we were looking at what they were doing. So it was a round-the-clock type operation there, and this was a joint service operation along with the Air Force. I was a shift supervisor and I had half of my shift was Air Force and the other half was Army. It was just a joint operations, and we were just one team. You didn't notice after the first few days. You didn't notice what a guy's uniform was. You just know what position he was sitting, and what his job was, and how well he was doing his job. And we got some pretty important stuff out of that year I was there. I'm very proud of the team I had there. Very proud of them. As a matter of fact, a caveat to it, as you look around up here, you see a lot of awards and medals and citations and all of that. But the greatest reward I think I had in all the military was the crew I had in Shemya. When on my departure, they all signed a letter of appreciation to me. And some of the comments, and one of the comments in particular I remember was something to the effect, if my children had to go to war today, I pray that it would be someone like you there to lead them. So that to me is sort of makes more sense than some of this up here on the wall. That's sort of my ego wall if you look up there, and it's okay, but it's in my man cave and nobody else sees it, so I just walk in here once in a while. Yeah, I remember those days. Let me see if I can pick up from there. I've spent a full year's tour in Shemya. Had certainly a unique assignment. Certainly Shemya is a small 6 to 8 mile island. It was actually, I think, one of the islands maybe occupied by the Japanese during World War II. A lot of bunkers built there, and it in itself was quite interesting. But I spent a year there. It's pretty well isolated. There was nothing there but a small Air Force base. Air Force people maintained the facilities and everything. The Air Force Security Service, they had airborne platforms. When certain things happened, they went airborne and was in the air for the duration of that launch or whatever, you know. So the Air Force had a big operation there in that respect. But they also, along with the Army, had a field station or a site. It's not a field station, but a operations that operated intercepts of what we could get from the launches. So
when you say they went airborne,
yeah, they had airborne platforms. The Air Force had their own aircraft. Airborne platforms was maintained. I would guess that a crew would probably be 10 to 15 people plus the pilots and co-pilots and crew chiefs. But they had positions they would sit and monitor. Everybody had a certain frequency they'd look at. They knew what they were looking for. And the bottom line to it was, if you know a guided missile is going to be launched, and you know what telemetry they're using, what frequency they're using, you can interrupt that. You can divert that, or you can take away the response of it. And that's the bottom line to it. Is it was the countermeasures to any rocket or any missile attack. It was what our Army Security Agency was supporting the National Security Agency, and which in turn would go back to research and development and say, here's how we know what is operating, now build something to countermeasure it. So it was, like I said, it was part of the Cold War. That's what we've done. So I spent a year in Shemya. Did get to come home for 30 days, and let me tell you, you could take a break off of Shemya, you took it. So I come home, spent 30 days with my family. Upon assignment from there, I went to Fort Hood, Texas. Really got back in the Army, so to speak. Got back to being in a real unit. The 522nd Combat Electronic Warfare Combat Electronic Warfare Battalion. We supported 2nd Army Division. 1st Air Cab was there, and they had supported the let's see who was up. We had 3 companies. One company was not physically there. It was up at Fort Lewis, Washington, but the battalion headquarters was there. So we were there to provide support to 2nd Armored Division in their training and make sure that they knew they had people there that would do intercepts and communications. We had linguists assigned, and of course the linguists were training that would be in English, but they certainly could have been a part of an assignment anywhere in the world, because we had Russian linguists, a Chinese linguist, whatever, that could have gone with a team had they been needed. So that was part of the getting back in the military. You had formations, you did PT, you done all the things that the military people do that we had gotten away from with these outward stations. So that was a big change, but I welcome it, and that's where I was promoted to first sergeant shortly after I got there, and I was first sergeant of a combat support team to the 2nd Armored Division, or company, to the 2nd Armored Divisions for the rest of my tenure in the military. We went up to Fort Lewis, did some training. We went to different places, but every time a 2nd Army would send a battalion out for field training, and they went out every 2 weeks, a battalion did, we would send a team to go with them. And of course that team was there for the armored people to get to know that, hey, this is what these people can do for us, make use of the intelligence we could provide for them. So good training, good program, and a good effort of the Army Security Agency. Just a caveat to that, the Army Security Agency that I grew up and knew and was part of now has been absorbed by MI. There's no longer an Army Security Agency. That was retired, and the MI people now are responsible for all the stuff that we were doing back then. MI existed then, but the Army Security Agency was sort of a special unit that had been identified and commissioned during those years of the Cold War. I spent 3 years at Fort Hood. Had a golden opportunity there to go on to the Sergeant Major's Academy. I'd been identified as a student for one of the future classes, and was to take an assignment from there to Europe. My ex-wife and I had two children who were in middle school, or would have been in middle school by the time we got there. She had finished up an RN degree and needed to take a state exam. And based upon what we were concerned about our children we would have had to farm the children out to school, because the assignment that I had been identified for was a very small unit, pretty well isolated from anything. So there's no American school. I think there was like 2 American schools available at the time, a large for middle high school, and the kids would have had to have been boarded there. And we felt like that with the drug issues there, that it's best we didn't take our children there. And the fact that she wanted to come back to Georgia and take her state exam, we made a decision to retire in 1977 and leave the military. I had a good military career. I have no regrets whatsoever. South Georgia Farm Board don't get the opportunities that I had. One, while I was in Ethiopia, I didn't share this with you, but I had the opportunity to have lunch with Haile Selassie, who was the Emperor of Ethiopia, as you well. Now, I didn't sit next to Haile and we didn't talk, but he come to our post, and he used to come there and get his dental work done. And I don't know if they didn't have why, but anyway. But there was always a luncheon for him, and certain people were selected to go and be a part of it and attend it. So I maybe got within 10 feet of him. I think I may have shook his hand. I'm not sure. I shook some of his aides' hands and all that stuff. But yeah, that was quite a caveat to my military career. It was, like I said, not many South Georgia Farm Boys get to meet the Emperor of Ethiopia. So yeah, I had a good career. And let me say this too before we finish this. I want to thank you, Southwest Georgia College, for what you're doing for preserving what's a lot of military people have done. I'm so happy to find out there's going to be a history of this, because somebody needs to go back and read this history and know what really happened, because there's got to be a lot of books written. It's just assumptions of people who never been there, done that. So I'm glad you're getting firsthand information, people who's been there and done that. So I want to thank you, thank the school for the efforts you're making to preserve this. And I think it's a real part, be a real part of American history at some point in life for a lot of people.
I sure hope so.
So
I want to go back real quick.
Yes.
To your time in Ethiopia.
Yes.
What was like your everyday life like there? Like you wake up, what's the first thing you do?
Well,
what's your routine?
let me share some of the daily lives there. We arrived in Ethiopia. Of course, we had a sponsor that met us, and the housing was available on post there for families, but most people preferred to live off post, as we did. And we were in the province of Eritrea, and it was quite unique, to say the least. We rented a villa. I lived in a villa. I had a maid, I had a houseboy, I had a night guard, and I paid them in Ethiopian money, and it was all very, very reasonable. The first week we were there, my son, who would have been 7 or 8, maybe 9, I'm not sure, at that time, he was in the street playing soccer with little Ethiopian kids that neither one of them could communicate verbally, but hey, he became a pretty good soccer player from playing soccer with them. We had a maid that she was very knowledgeable of the local customs and everything, and then most of all our food come from right off the market, because we'd give her money, and she would go shop. We had a houseboy who was a very knowledgeable young man, and my thoughts was, from what he said, he was probably part of the Eritrean Liberation Front that was going on, wanted to live. He never come to me and said that, but we had conversations. And I had a night guard. This is sort of a caveat to that tour too. His duties was to guard the area during the night, because what they call shifties would come in, and they'd come in the yard and car and steal anything they could get their hands on. These are just, and I kept Ethiopian money available in my house and just put in a dresser drawer in the bedrooms. And when it comes time to pay them, I'd pay. Well, I don't know how it happened, but he decided that he'd go in, and he took all the money. He went downtown, and this poor kid had probably never had anything but the clothes on his back. He went downtown and bought him a suit, went to the ice cream parlor and about made him sick eating ice cream. I called the MPs, and they come out, and they brought the local Eritrean police with them and said, we'll find him. And they did. And the next day they brought him back, and the poor guy looked like he'd been beat to death. And they brought him to the gate. They made him put his hand on the gate. They took a picture. Come in the house, to the door of the house, they took a picture. The bedroom, they took another picture. They took what money they found and put it back in the dresser drawer and opened it, made him put his hands on it, and I took a picture. And I asked the MP who was accompanying them, I said, what's going on? He said, they're gathering evidence. I said, evidence? Don't look like to me. He said, no. They'll use those pictures, and the judge will say he's guilty. And he says this guy will do good to last a year. So a unique justice system they had, to say the least. So very, very unique. Other things in Ethiopia that went on. They had a golf course there, but it was sand greens. And the greens, the fairways, was used, and horses would graze on the fairways, because they had an animal research firm there, and they had a right to those fairways on how this come about. So when you played golf, you had a forward caddy. He'd go run the horses off, and you'd hit through them, and you had a caddy, and you would get up to the greens, and you would rake the greens and smooth, and then you'd get to put your ball and move on to the next Oh, so certainly unique, and to say the least. So it was great, interesting. Too bad we had to leave early because of the strife that was going on between Eritrea and Ethiopia, but we did leave earlier. But it was quite an educational experience for my family, for my children especially. My son, he talked about it all the time. So.
What about your time in the Aleutians? Can you tell us anything else about your job there?
I can tell you that for the most part it's very boring. You'd sit positions all evening, nothing happened. But in those few times that it did happen, it was really hot. I mean, we knew through monitoring communications and knowing, we knew when we saw activity pick up there was going to be a launch. So you put everybody on pods. I think I won't go into details, but we had several positions monitoring several things. And so everybody sit on that pod. And these guys were ready because for the most part, the nights they had sit there and with nothing to do, we don't have very few pods monitors to run. They'd play cards or do whatever, but when the time comes, those guys were as good as they come. So unique about Shemya itself it was like probably entire tour there, I probably saw the sun maybe 4 or 5 days. The rest of the time it was cloudy, and most of that time it was snowing from probably September through April or May. It snowed, but it snowed horizontally because you always had a 20 to 30 knot wind blowing, and very boring, but until the bell rang. And then everybody was, and like I said, out of the year there was probably, I don't know, 15 days that were just, it was unreal as to the activity and what was going on and what we got, and getting feedback for it.
When activity picked up, what was the atmosphere like there?
Oh, it was like everybody took their job very seriously. They knew we only got this one shot, so you didn't miss nothing, because you're only going to get this one shot. You were looking for a new guidance system. You were looking for a different telemetry system. You were looking for different type of modulation on the telemetry. So you had to get it. There was no tomorrow. You got it, because everybody back in the intelligence world was looking at the raw data that you were getting. So, and it was the same way in Ethiopia, and that was just a way of life in the Army Security Agency. Most of it was mundane, routine, but when it become time to do it, you done it. So, yeah, unique to say the least.
And when you talk about launches, were these like Soviet test launches, or were they potential attacks?
Well, no, they were test launches.
Okay.
Of course, the Soviet Union, it's public knowledge, they had a testing facility at a very short distance. I don't know the kilometers, probably 300, 350, 400 kilometers from Shemya. And there was no way they couldn't launch it. We couldn't track it because it was just, and what we couldn't get, the airborne platform. That's why they were there. So it was a good coverage. And like I said, it was very important because you needed to know. We needed to know. Because when it come, if and when it comes to time to be real in war, you don't even know how to deal with that guidance system and launch of that missile. And that's was the bottom line to what we were doing. So, yeah, that was unique to say the least. So, as I said before and to reiterate, it was a challenge to me, very rewarding to have been a part of it. A lot of good, smart people come through there, those operators. So I was honored to be a part of it.
How did you cope with being so far away from your family while you were there?
That was the hardest part, is being away from the family. The tour in Korea, the tour in Shemya. You missed a lot. You missed your certain things. You missed your kids' birthdays. You missed things. You didn't have the communication we had back then. Was just the beginning of the cassette tapes, so we would send tapes. My wife and I would at the time, and the kids would talk every once in a while. But you missed it, and you had just lost that year of their lives, and it was amazing. Kids growing up, what a year out of their life has changed and what they have done, you know. And both of those two tours in particular, my family come back and lived in Seminole County, and it was just a change that you had lost so much in that. But and I'm sure all of our military people experience that when they go on these unaccompanied tours and don't have their families, and especially these young men and women today who is going to Afghanistan, Iraq, and other places and serving in combat tours. Yes, I can understand the stress that they're under and what they come back here with, and we need to do everything in the world we can to help them, because and I haven't been there and walked in their shoes, but I got a good feel for what they're dealing with. And you can imagine 18, 19-year-old young guy, we don't know it all at that age. We may think we do, some of them, but you throw them out there in the real world and somebody's trying to take your life and going to. And so it's very important that we do what we can for our young veterans when they come back. Go ahead.
What was your most memorable experience while you were in the service?
Well, I had a lot. I shared with you about my son, how he adopted to just playing soccer with little raggedy Ethiopian kids who'd never seen him there, didn't even know what the white face was. That was certainly a moment. I know this is something you still remember. My wife was a pretty good golfer at that time. We were playing in a tournament, and she lost the tournament because she hit one of the horses who run across the track and deflected her ball. And I know that doesn't make much sense, but if you're a golfer, and that wasn't. But I guess the real things is the young people whose lives you touched along the way, the influence maybe you had. I can share a story with you. In my tour at Fort Hood, where I was the first sergeant of a company, I had linguist females in it, and a lot of the linguist was females, and we had, 20-something assigned. I had one in particular I found in the field. She had gone out on one of these teams, and she had had a problem, and I had to send her back in. She had basically started her period, and she didn't take the stuff out to be prepared. So I happened to go out in the field to check on the team and found her. So sent her back in and got cleaned up and everything. But I tell you that to tell you this. A couple of months later, she come to me and she said, "First Sergeant, would you help me go to Officer Candidate School?" I said, "Well, yeah, let's talk some." I said, and we talked, and so I started the process for her. And I started getting letters of recommendation, and I gave her a letter of recommendation. And she did. She went to Fort McClellan to the WAC Army Officer Candidate School, done good, graduated. Never heard anything else from her until I had retired several years later and was working at what is now Englehart, what is BSAF now, but it was Englehart at the time. I get this call one day, and she said, "Is this First Sergeant Key?" I said, "Well, in another lifetime, I might have been." She identified herself, and she said, "I want to thank you for touching my life." She said, "I'm retiring Lieutenant Colonel. Me and my husband, who I've met, and we're retiring. And I won't go into details of where and when and everything, but she said, I'd love for you to come and be a part of it because you were such a part of my life, and you were there when I needed you." She said, "From that field trip until you got me in Officer Candidate School." So that was a very touching moment to me. And another thing that I remember back in this battalion that I was a part of, Uh, those who've been in the military know that there's some people that just can't cope with the military, some young people, and they'll do whatever they have to do to get out, up to and doing stupid and foolish things. Well, I would not accept that. I would never let a guy destroy, or male or female, destroy their lives by doing something stupid and taking a general discharge to get out of the military. I went as far as call their parents, or call their families, and I tell them this is the situation and this is what will happen. He'll carry this stigma forever if we let him get out with a general discharge. And I got some good guidance, some parents, some of them said, take him out behind the barracks. And I said, no, that's not why I'm calling. I need your encouragement to encourage him. So I think I took, out of 3 years there, I think I had 4 or 5 people in that battalion that the battalion commander sent to my unit for, he called it rehab company. You go in the rehab company, First Sergeant Key will deal with you. So certainly an honor. And if I touched their lives, then I done what I was there for. And I think I did. I never let one get out. I'd never let someone take a general discharge just to get out of the military. I convinced them one way or the other that, hey, a couple of more years of your life and you'll be through with it. I understand you want to get out. Now, let's make it an effort here. We'll work with you, you work with me. And I had one young lady who was just torn apart. She couldn't deal with the structure of the military, and it took a lot of work with her, but she left the unit before she got out, but I know that she finished her I guess it was a 3-year obligation, might have been 4-year obligation if you went to language school, because I think it was a year of language, so you had to have an extra year. So touching the young lives along the way was probably the most rewarding of all of it. Is, I would say today, if I had to go to war, just give me 30 American GIs. I can tell you, out of 30 American GIs, I can find enough of talent to do whatever needs to be done. I have all the respect in the world for our young people who go in the military, because I've been there, had them, and know that you can find somebody who knows something about what needs to be done. And I would say that, like I said, if I had to go, pick me 30 and let me have them. So, yeah, that was most rewarding to me, is being able to touch those young lives and maybe had an influence.
Well, do you have anything else you want to add? Any interesting stories you might have forgotten?
No, I really don't. I have maintained contact with a lot of people that I serve with. I knew some, especially through my officer candidate school class that I was part of for a while. A lot of lives lost there. Some of the Special Forces guys I knew in Fort Devens when the 10th was there. It's just that some good people made a total sacrifice for this country, and I hope people never forget that. That's the ultimate, is to lay down your life for the country, and these people done it. And I would say that we don't never ever need to forget them. Those are the real heroes out there today. Is those young people who paid it all. You've heard the cliche, and I'm sure that all paid some, but some paid all. Well, that's certainly true for those men and women who gave their lives for this country, and I'm that touches my heart to know that the good people over time that's given their life for this country. So the people today, and I won't get on a political soapbox, but I will say this, that all people need to realize that the freedom that we enjoy today didn't come cheap. The American GI paid a tremendous price for it.
Absolutely. All right, well, if there's nothing
I would
else,
say again to all those people who may look at this at some point in life, their lives, I personally was proud to have been a part of the American military machine. I know there's some, they'll always be some disagreements about the military, but I had it was some of the best training in the world for me. As I mentioned, the cliche, the South Georgia farm boy, and that's what I was. And the experiences and the opportunities that were presented to me, and I think they probably still exist today in the military for a young person who is considering trying the military. I would say go for it, but educate yourself, find out what you're going to do, and not to say that everyone's going to be perfect out there, because there are some issues with discipline and all of that, but that's going to be wherever you go in life. So my hat's off to those young people who choose to go and be a part of it. And I thank you again for this, and to the people, as I said earlier, who may look at this at some point in their life. I think it's a great record as to what happened. Mine's just a small story. There's a lot of great stories out there that people who had a tremendous experience. And I hope that as much of that as possible gets recorded and made available and realized. And I wish we had gotten more of that in World War II. The greatest generation of all the people I hold in high esteem. It's the second World War II vets who was no doubt, as Tom Brokaw said in his book, the greatest generation, and they were, and I take my hats off to them. You talked to one of them, Mr. Spooner over in some Iron City. I'm sure you remember that. Mm-hmm. Roger Spooner.
Yeah, I've talked to a handful of them.
Roger is my grandson. Roger and we share a grandson. So I salute him. He's tremendous story he had of his service in World War II. So yeah, I'm glad you got his on record. He deserved to be there. Okay.
All right. Well, on behalf of the Military Education Preservation Project, thank you for your service. And thank you for your time and your willingness to share your experiences with us.
Well, like I said, it was my pleasure. And I would add this too. Probably a couple times along the way, if I could have quit, I would have. There's frustrations in wherever you go, but fortunately, you had committed to a time obligation, so you couldn't walk away like you can out here in the civilian world. I want to share this story with you. When we relate to the civilian world after having been in the military, I had a good friend that retired a couple of years before I did, and he called me one day and he said, "Lee, let me tell you what's wrong out here in the civilian world." I said, "What, Ray?" He said, "There's nobody in charge. They're just all milling around. There's no formations I can put them in or anything. I can't get them under control." So I carry that with me today, and that's what's wrong with the civilian world out here. There's nobody in charge. They're just milling around. Anyway, it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I hope people will glean something from this that would help them along the way and understanding what the American GI is and what he's done for them through time. Okay.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Key.
Thank you.